So I'm going to show you how you can create this exterior render. Breaking down the scene here, this model, this cabin is brought in through Arch Models. Sometimes you just don't have time to model and I want to concentrate on the actual scene itself, so I just brought in this model. I added in the stilts myself, I added in the electrical pole, quick model. The planting is using Forest Pro, this balcony is then using Railclone, and then the surface I use Megascans and Vray to bring in a nice soil texture. So other than that, let's jump straight into it. So here's the scene. I have the cabin here, just attached. I created the stilts myself. They're probably not structurally sound in terms of engineering look, but it does the job. I then created these myself with a simple model. I just added in these, added in some wood, and created the tilt as high as I wanted so it'll be in the shot. The first thing I want to do is I want to create the camera location. And to do that, I'm going to go into my create panel. I'm going to go into camera. I'm going to go down to V-Ray. I'm going to select my V-Ray physical camera. Go to the top view. And I'm going to drag this in roughly where I want it. Just like that. And I've hit F3, you can see it's under the ground. So first of all, let's drag our camera into our render. And let's move this to where we want to be. Now, if I go in here and hit C, it'll pop into that camera. So I'm going to move this up roughly where I want it. And as you can see, when I move that, it's also moving the target on the same height as which I want for the moment. Now I've set up settings and I know the exact location I want this camera, so I'm going to input that now. So I have the camera set up where I want. Now if I was to hit render on this, you'll see we don't really see anything. Now I can hit 8 and I could like change this to white just so we can see a bit better. And you can see we have our model, we have the stilts and we have the electrical poles. But we need to add in a proper light source now. So I'm going to switch this back to black and we're going to add in our light source. So go into your create panel and go to your settings here, your systems, and then hit daylight. You can create a V-Ray sun and stuff like this, but I want to create an exact time. So I'm going to go into my top view. We can click this anywhere we want and drag up, and we have our daylight system. Now when I go into settings, there's two things I do. I switch off the skylight and I switch this back to V-Ray sun. I say yes, I want a V-Ray environment and click yes. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to set up the sun. I'm also going to click on clouds. So hit setup and go into your settings. Now in terms of location, I'm going to pick somewhere in Europe. Let's go somewhere nice and sunny, not too sunny. Paris. I would pick Dublin where I'm from, but it's not the sunniest place. So let's just click OK here. Now that knows the location, latitude and longitude. So if I was to go in here, and if I go in here, go in settings, you can see it's at the sunniest day of the year, 21st of June at 12. So if I click render on this now, so after hitting render, this is what our scene looks like. And see, it's nice and sunny. It's middle of the day, 12 o'clock, but I want to change it to early in the morning, just waking up period. In setup, we can now change the time to what we want. So I said I wanted it early. I'm going to go as early as 5 and see what it looks like. And we're kind of getting that just the sun peeking up kind of look I'm looking for. Maybe we'll go for 5:30, a bit earlier. So that's a bit better, maybe 15 minutes. Yeah, okay, let's go for that and we're happy out. But now we need to do one more thing. I want to change the camera settings. So here, select the camera, go into modify, and these are the default settings. What I'm going to do, since it's an outdoor environment, I'm going to put the F up to 16. Basically, I'm allowing less light in, but I'm getting a wider, a deeper depth of field. And shutter speed, I'm going to change this to about 1/10 of a second. So we're getting that brightness up. Let's change that more. Maybe we'll go for 20th. A tiny bit more, 30th, and then we're kind of getting that kind of warm glow that I'm looking for. So that's the daylight and camera setup. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to add in the foliage. So before we jump on to adding in foliage, what I want to do is I want to add a believable texture onto this surface right here. And there is Quixel Bridge, which has these amazing surfaces. So if I go home and go to surfaces and go to, let's say, ground, we have all these amazing ones we can use and download and export into our scene. Now, I have a bit of an issue. When I hit export here, it doesn't really work, as I have to uninstall it, install again. Sometimes it works. So now what I've done is, in where it saves it, once I've saved it, if I go to settings, you'll see I have it saved in here. If I click in here and go to downloaded, you'll see I can eventually find my surfaces in here, and we have our materials in this area. So once I know what that is, instead of using the export thing, I'm going to use this plugin. I'm going to load my textures in. So once you get to your maps, I'm going to select all these, click OK, and it's good to know which ones to plug it into. The only ones it doesn't know is, say, there's two displacements, so it doesn't know which one to use. You can use a high res one or a low res one. I'm going to use the high res one. So in my displacement, I'm going to say the XOR. Click that, and I'm going to go to real world, and we'll go every 4 meters. Reflection, I'm going to bring this down to around here. Click OK, and then we can create the material. Now I'm going to call this ground surface, and I'm going to click OK. Once I'm happy with that, I can click here. I want to add in the displacement, and I'm going to put this to about, we'll put 1 meter for now. I'm going to hit apply to selection. So that's done that, and it's also added in a displacement mod on the top. So now one thing is, I don't want to add displacement to this entire surface. It's excessive and I don't need to. I only need to see some displacement in what I'm seeing in the viewport. So what I'm going to do is, in here, I'm going to go to add in an edit poly, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to polygon, and in my selection tool, I'm going to hit backface. I'm going to go in here and select the polygons that I see in the camera. So once I select that, it's only going to select the ones that we see. Now I might add these in, and then I'm going to deselect these ones. But for the most part, it's after selecting that. So now what I can do is I can uncheck backface here, and I can hit detach, and I'm going to call this surface displacement. And I'm going to click OK. So now once that's done, I can grab this, hit cut. I don't want it on the main surface. I want to attach this to this surface and hit paste. Okay, so now that has the displacement. Now we missed 2 here, but I'm not too worried about that because it's only going to be a small bit and we won't see it too much in the view. So now that that's done, we have the material, except this displacement is obviously still in this main texture. They both have the same material. So what I need to do, first of all, I need to duplicate this, and I'm going to delete this bottom one because we don't want the displacement in this, and that's going to be applied to our larger scene here, this larger material. And then we click there and we add it onto that. So let's name this so we know. So this is just ground, and this one is ground surface displacement, just so we know which one. And now let's see what it looks like. So when I hit render, you can see there's a bit of an issue. Well, this surface doesn't have any UVs, so let's fix that now. Now you could fix this easily by just selecting this and adding in some UVs down here. But what I'm going to use is I'm going to use a triplanar, and then once I add that in, I'm going to use a Vray UVW randomizer. So what does a triplanar do? It basically creates your UVs for free. It creates an X, Y, and Z projection, and since this is just a surface, it's perfect for this. So once I click this, I have that in the mapping source of my material, my texture I should say, and then the mapping source, I'm going to click here, Vray and Vray UVW randomizer. So now this is going to be controlling everything. So once I have this set, I'm going to select this real world, and let's increase this to 4 and 4, put the blur down to 0, and let's see what it looks like now. So it's looking a bit better, but there's a few things we now need to do. We need to plug it into the other maps. So let's do that. So now that we've plugged it in, we can see a much better scene, and we can see that geometry being pulled through. Now this might be a bit much. It's really personal preference of what you want, but if you want to change this, the impact, you can select your surface in here. Let's just make this smaller. Select our displacement surface, and let's say we don't want a meter, we only want half a meter. And let's move down here. You can see the detail here, and then we also want to put this to minus point. You always want it to be about half, minus 0.25. So then it pushes down the opposite way, and then we get this kind of detail. We have these branches being pulled up, we have branches here, and this is absolutely perfect for what we need for our baseline, because it's going to be covered up mostly by grass and foliage anyway. So that's perfect for now, and then we just need to make sure that the other material has the same UV mapping triplanar, and so on. So now that we've got our soil in our ground cover, we need to add in our foliage. So let's do that right now. So over here I have my surface. I've duplicated the surface into its own thing over here in surfaces. So we can go into Forest Pro, click here, make sure it's on generate, and click this surface now. Click yes here, and now we want to go into our modify panel, and we're going to be adding in grass. So once I click library, I want to go to my whichever planting you have. I have globe plants, which are really good, and I'm basically going to use this one here. If I zoom in, you might see a bit better. So this one here, and I'm going to click load selected. Now it's giving me a warning because we've hit pretty much our max limit, and you can see it's pretty big, but that's why in our scene, we're not going to see all this back here. We're not going to see all this in the front. So what I'm going to do is I have these splines set up and I have an exclude one here. So if I go into my areas, I can then add in this spline and then switch it from include to exclude. So now we only see those, like, because we don't need to have them up here. There's absolutely insane to have that much. Now let's see what it looks like. And this is the preset. And I think off the bat, it's going to look pretty good. So you can see straight away, we get so much more believability just by one of these presets that predefines everything. So it's facing the right way. We get a bit of scattering. It doesn't cover everything. So we didn't waste time creating this surface here. We get to see some of those branches working, and straight away we have a more believable scene. So now let's add in some more dense foliage around the edges. So again, I'm going to make sure I have this surface. I'm going to isolate it. I'm going to go to my Forest Pro object and click on that surface. Click yes, right click and go into my settings. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my geometry and add in some planting. Now I know beforehand what planting I'm using, so I'm using the search engine just to find the ones I want. So I'm going to click this and add it in, and then I'm going to add in a few more. So I've added in the foliage and I have these 3 different plants. So if I go to display, I can change this maybe to points cloud to make it look a bit different and use color ID, and we can see it. Now you can see it's incredibly dense, but I did that kind of on purpose because I want to show you what I'm going to do next, which is using this spline to create a path of exclusion. So if I go into areas, I can now add in this path that I've created down here, just this spline here. Click add, click here. And for the moment, nothing's going to happen because I want to switch this to exclude. Now you can see wherever that path is, it's going to exclude. If I go back to my camera view, you see it's not in the way of our camera and it's on the way, but I don't want it this thick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it down, and you can see as I bring that in, it brings it closer and we can create that path. So I'm going to go for something like, let's go 2.5. That's pretty good. And now the great thing is I can hit this distribution, so this fall off effect. And by that, I mean, if I click density here, what it's going to do is if I change this play back now to, let's go proxy, it might be a bit easier to see. And I go back to my areas and I go to fall off, I can then start bringing this exclude. And what it's doing is it's kind of roughing up those edges and extending that exclusion based on this curve here. I'm also going to do that to scale, which is going to be even better. So when I do scale, I can do exclude, but it'll bring this down to 0. So what I want to do is when I go to edit curve, I don't want this to be 0 because or even that low, because I don't want plants going to a ridiculous size. So when I select this, I wanted to go, oh, the minimum size I want it to be is 50%. And then I can even bring this up, and I want to go this to be 150%, so even bigger on the side. Maybe 120, 150 might be a bit too big. And then we can start bringing this up and down, and we can hit render and see what it looks like now. So as you can see, we now have this kind of pathway going up into our cabin. So that's kind of what I wanted. And it's working pretty well. Like it's pretty good, except these are way too dense at the moment. So let's bring that density down. Go to the transform as well, and we need to start changing this. So we need it to scale differently, we need to rotate differently, and so on. So once you check these, the default should be good enough. And then we're going to go to distribution, and it's on full. I'm going to change this to something like patches 6, and density, let's increase this to something like 200. Let's try 250. That's a bit too less, so 200 seems good. And I also want to do one other thing, which is geometry. Select all these, and I want to sync them a tiny bit. So I'm going to go like minus 10 centimeters, so minus 0.1. Oh, whoops, minus 0.1. And that'll sync them just a bit. Now if I hit render, we're getting a bit more of a believable look. Now it might be a bit too dense, but it's okay at the moment. So let's just keep going, and next thing we're going to do is add in the big evergreen trees. So again, we're doing the exact same thing. We're going to make sure we're selecting the Forest Pro plugin. We're going to go to generate, and we're going to click our main surface. So now we're going to pick our geometry. I know the trees I want to pick. I have them set up, so I'll add them in and jump straight back. So once you have the trees that you want loaded in, I want to add in an areas one, and I want to add in that spline again where I'm excluding it from the cabin, because obviously we don't want trees going through our cabin. Make sure it's set to exclude, and there you go. Now I want this to be quite dense, so in my distribution I'm going to set this to full, but obviously I don't want to be that dense, so I'm going to put it to about 500. Then in the transform, I'm going to switch all these on. And again with the geometry, select all these. I'm going to bring the Z offset to minus 0.2, just to make sure it's sunk under the ground enough. Now if I hit render, let's see what it looks like. So now it looks good, but we've run into a slight issue, which is we have the time of the sun correct, but the sun is right on our back. Now we could rotate the entire scene, but obviously we just want to rotate the sun. But we've set it in such a way that it's the exact time of day. So rotating the sun makes kind of no sense, but we're going to cheat anyway. So how do we do that? So first of all, the sun, it seems to be right behind us. So we want to almost go 180, maybe less. So let's hit stop, go into our sun, select it, and we're going to go to setup. And down here we have north direction. So let's change this. It's at the moment it's at 180. So let's see what happens if we hit 0 and hit render. So hitting 0 definitely wasn't the solution. So let's go something like, let's try 135 for a second. I want to see what that looks like. Bit too much. Let's go 90, and let's just keep changing until we have something we like. 275 isn't too bad. What we might need to do is then increase this or decrease this, because we want the sun to be higher in the day. So let's go an hour earlier, 6:30. So now we're getting a bit more of a brighter look. But again, I think this direction is still not enough. So let's just keep rotating it. Let's go in increments of 45. So 45, no. Let's go 90. Nope. Let's go 145. And there we go. We're starting to get light coming through. And we're getting there. Yeah, so that's kind of our look. Now, the issue is we have some shadows coming in here, but what we can do is we can just move these trees, because we have complete control over what we're doing. So let's just move some of these trees out of the way. And how do we do that? So let's go into our Forest Pro object. So in our Forest Pro object, we can go down here to items. We're going to get a warning message, which pretty much means you disable area and distribution parameters, which is fine because I'm happy the way it is. I just want to start moving individual trees. So I can select this and we can start moving these out of the way. Now let's see what that looks like after moving some of them away. So after moving them away, we get a bit of a better look. We also get a nice shadow coming in here, but it's not taking up too much space. So overall, that's pretty good for the planting. So we have the planting scattered up here, we have the trees going around, and you have the grass coming in over our surface. So with Railclone, it's similar to Forest Pro in some aspects. You click it and you drag it onto your scene. And then I have a spline here where I want the balcony to be introduced. So once I have this selected, go into modify, and we can go into our none here and we can click a library. So it has a bunch of library assets. The one I want to go into is, I believe, architecture, interior, no, building types. Let me go find it and I'll let you know. Don't know where it is. So I eventually found it and it's in railings, and the one I want to pick is this one here, I think, or this one or the other. Let's go for this one and I'll click import selected. Then I want to go down here and I want to pick the spline I want to use, zoom in and click here, and we have our railing. Easy as that. Now, one thing is, if I hit render now, you'll see that it doesn't really match the building. So we need to change this white to the same color as this. So let's hit stop and let's get our materials. Select the material over here. That's it. And then we're going to select the railing here. Now the thing with Railclone is it creates one giant sub material, even for the materials you're not going to use, just the way it works. So what I'm going to do is bring this down, select the whole thing, hit H to hide it and C to organize it. You can drag this up, hit C again, and we have our material here. And we just want to replace this into where we see that metal, which I think is, if I click here, we have our white vinyl, and that should be it. Let's click it in, click OK. And yeah, so now if I hit render, we have the texture of this railing matching the texture of the overall building. So the easiest thing to do is we just need to create a cable going from one end to the other. That's it. So I'm going to hit S to go into snapping the vertex, and I'm just going to snap roughly here, and I'm going to keep it dead straight, or as straight as possible, straight to here. just one vertex each. And I'm going to click that here. Now I'm going to do the exact same going the opposite way in the lower ones. Click each vertex. Go over here and click it right there. And then we also need to go into the front view because they won't be in the correct position. So just snap that to here and grab our spline wherever it is here and snap that to here. Once that's done, we need to duplicate this one over, shift and click, snap it over, make it a copy, and we're pretty much done. Not kidding. What we also need to do is we need to add in a bit of bend. So how do we do that? So very simply put, you just grab your splines. Well, what I do is I'm going to attach these to make it a bit easier. So attach these all as one spline, right click, and then we're going to add on top a normalized spline. So once I click this, I'm going to click show knots and you see the knots. So now what we need to do is I want to make sure that it's insert. I don't want weighted and it's just one. So what it's doing is inserting one vertex here and here on top of each other. Then we can go edit spline on top, go to vertex mode, select both these, and all we need to do is push these down like so. So once you push those down, we get that kind of dipping look. So once you have these pushed down like this, we get our look and feel. We can then go back to line, hit yes, that's fine. And then in rendering, we want to enable in render, enable in viewport. And obviously we don't want this a meter thick, probably somewhere between 3 centimeters and 4 maybe. So 0.03, and we have our cables. It's probably a bit too big, so let's go to 0.02. And it's as easy as that. We have our splines, we have our scene, and we can add in our forest objects back in, and we have pretty much our scene. The very last thing now I'm going to do is I'm going to add in some people. So in Cosmos Browser, I'm going to click here, and we're going to find someone we like. So let's make this a bit bigger so we can find something. We're going to go to, we want someone standing, and we want, I think originally I had 2 elderly people, these guys. So I'm going to hit export. It's going to export it into our scene. I'm going to click and drag this into our entourage, and we're going to put them on the balcony. So let's see where they are. Move them into position, snap them up, and then rotate them the way you want where they're looking out, because most people look over their balcony. Like that. And then if we hit render, we should have our final scene. So there we have our scene after rendering. We have our foliage, we have everything we want. But if you want, you can add in a few things. I usually do stuff in post in Photoshop, but if you really want, what I would do is you can add an exposure and you can add a white balance in here. And those are the only two I really add, and then I like to do everything more so in Photoshop. So in exposure, I've set my camera. I don't think I want it brighter. You can bring it down a tiny bit maybe. I don't like adjusting this too much. I like the highlight bar being up. You can add in contrast, but I'd be really subtle about this because you can lose a lot of detail. Now in white balance, this is one I can change. You can make it look a bit more blue if you wanted by lowering this to about 5,000, or you can make it look warmer by bringing it up to something like 8,000, and you get that bright warm look. Now it's up to preference. Now I'm going to go somewhere maybe around here, maybe 6,000 was good. I'm happy with how it looks. Now the magenta tint, most likely you want to do something like 0.05, something very subtle, or minus 0.05. That will give you 2 different looks. You can easily go too extreme on this, which you should be careful about. So I would probably go minus 0.05, and you get kind of a more reddish look in the soil. And that's pretty much it. Then you just need to save it out. You can bring it into Photoshop and do a bit more work. You can bring it into Photoshop Lightroom even. And I hope this has been helpful, and I hope it helps you create your own kind of projects. And I'll see you in the next video.